The French Revolution was a time period between 1789 and 1799. Some of the main causes were social inequalities, idea put forward by the Enlightenment philosophers, financial crisis caused by the wars, poor harvests, and the rise in the cost of bread. Both Louis XV and Louis XVI then showed good leadership. The French Revolution led to many executions and tragedies. The meeting of the Estates General was a meeting of all the estates in the French society. Louis XVI called the meeting for the first time since 1614 because he hoped people would help him on the economic and agricultural crisis. Each of the estates got one vote, but the third estate's representative got mad because he preferred a system where each representative got one vote. The third estate feared that a representative voted by order of the clergy and the nobility would overrule them. In the end, they couldn't come to an agreement on how to vote for the meeting. The third estate had their own discussion and established themselves as the National Assembly and wanted to work with or without the other estates. Louis XVI tried to stop their actions by trying to end the Estates General by forcing the states to separate. The third estate responded by moving their discussions to a nearby tennis court. This is where they took the tennis court oath. The Estates General had failed and the first steps of the French Revolution had begun. The tennis court oath was a pledge that was signed at the start of the French Revolution by the Third Estate. It was signed on June 20, 1789, and represented the commoners and the Estates General after they were locked out of their meeting place. The members moved their meeting to a tennis court in St. Louis, Versailles, and signed a note that they wouldn't stop meeting until they had a new written constitution for France. The storming of the Bastille happened on July 14, 1789. More than thousands of civilians with weapons got together in front of the Bastille around the morning time. They demanded the surrender of the prison. They tried to work things out. After a few hours, the irritated crowd attacked the outer courtyard while they were undefended. They cut the drawbridge chains. The governor realized his troops couldn't fight much longer, so he called for ceasefire and offered agreements to the attackers. The attackers refused, but the governor opened the gates to the inner courtyard. He was then stabbed a lot and had his head on a pike and then was carried around the city streets. People waited for another attack, but they never came. Now the French Revolution had begun. The Reign of Terror was a violent time period of the French Revolution. Radicals took charge of the government and arrested and killed or executed anyone who they thought may not be loyal to the revolution. Maximilien Robespierre was the radicals' leader. They took control of the government, and that's what started the Reign of Terror. It began on September 5th, 1793. It ended on July 27th, 1794, when Robespierre was removed from power and executed. During this time, people had to watch out what they said or did and who they talked to, because they could be killed if they said something against the revolution. Sometimes the revolutionaries accused people that they did not like or wanted to get rid of. All they had to do was accuse someone and they would be guilty. Around 17,000 people were killed in France, including the 2,639 in Paris, and over 200,000 people were arrested. Napoleon was a military general who used his military power and overthrew the monarch of King Louis XVI and took the title of Emperor in 1804. He strengthened the country, government, and modernizing France. He also expanded France's board by a lot. Napoleon was scared of what would happen to his empire after he died, since his wife Josephine didn't have a child. He then divorced her and formed an alliance with the royal family of Austria by marrying Mary Louise, who was a grandniece of Marie Antoinette, who gave birth to his son Napoleon II. Napoleon's personality was the biggest danger for the future of his empire, since he had the desire for power. He made 3 mistakes that were disastrous. Here they are. In November of 1806, Napoleon created a blockade to close all trade and communication with Great Britain and other European nations. Napoleon named this policy the Continental System, since it would make continental Europe more self-sufficient. He also wanted to destroy Great Britain's commercial and industrial economy. Napoleon's blockade wasn't tight enough, since smugglers, aided by the British, were able to bring cargo from Britain into Europe. The blockade weakened British trade, but it didn't destroy it. Britain responded with their own blockade. Since British Navy was stronger, it was able to make the blockade better. Another reason was the Peninsula War. It was an effort to make Portugal accept the Continental System. He sent an attack force through Spain. The Spanish people were angered, so Napoleon took out the Spanish king and put his own brother Joseph on the throne. This made the Spanish people feel more angry. They thought that Napoleon would attack the Catholic churches. Spanish peasants, who were known as guerrillas, attacked the French armies in Spain for 6 years. Napoleon couldn't defeat the guerrillas since they worked in small groups. The British sent troops to help the Spanish. Napoleon lost over 300,000 men during the war, which weakened the French Empire. People like the Spanish guerrillas. Italians, Germans, and the conquered people turned away from the French. The last mistake Napoleon made was in 1812 when he invaded Russia. The Russian Caesar refused to quit selling grain to Britain. The Russian and the French rulers thought each other had competing designs on Poland because of the breakdown in their alliance. Napoleon decided to invade Russia. On June of 1812, Napoleon and his army of more than 420,000 soldiers marched into Russia. Alexander, the Russian Caesar, pulled back since Napoleon's army was advanced. The Russian practiced a scorched earth policy, which involved burning grain fields and killing livestock to leave nothing for the enemy to eat. On September 7th of 1812, the armies fought in the Battle of Borodino. After many hours of fighting, the Russians fell back. Napoleon then moved into Moscow. When he came into Moscow, the city was on fire. Napoleon stayed in the city until the middle of October and then decided to come back to France. Then the Russian raiders attacked Napoleon's army. A lot of soldiers died. In the middle of December, the last people who survived left Russia. After all of this, the French army only had 10,000 soldiers left. Napoleon's enemies saw that he was weak, they attacked him. Also, Austria declared war on Napoleon. Now all the main forces were at war with France. Napoleon made an army which was very unprepared for battle, so other people easily defeated him. A few months later, King Frederick, William III of Prussia, and Caesar Alexander I of Russia marched through the French capital. Napoleon wanted to fight, but his general said he couldn't. Then in 1812, he gave up his throne. The victors put him on a tiny island called Elba. Louis XVI's brother assumed the throne as Louis XVIII, but the new king became very unpopular among his subjects. A lot of the peasants did. They thought he wanted to undo the revolution's land reforms. Napoleon needed to try to take back power. He escaped Elba on March 1st, 1815, then took back his power. He was the Emperor of France. The European allies prepared their armies. The British army prepared near a village near Waterloo in Belgium. Then on June 18, 1815, Napoleon attacked. The British fought and defended their ground. Then later that afternoon, Prussia's army had arrived. Together they fought the French. 2 days later, after Napoleon gave up, the defeat stopped Napoleon's last chance at power, called the 100 Days. The British shipped Napoleon to St. Helena. He lived there lonely for 6 years. He died in 1821 of a stomach problem, probably cancer. Forming powers of Europe, Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, who were against the French Empire, saw Napoleon's power collapse in 1814. The Congress of Vienna was the first of a lot of international meetings that were known as the Concert of Europe, which was an attempt to make peaceful balance of power. The Congress of Vienna ended in a Napoleonic world and tried to fix the monarchies Napoleon had overthrown. It was the first time in history where national representatives came together to make treaties instead of relying on messages between the capitals. The Concert of Europe, despite all the changes and diplomatic breakdowns, a couple of decades later created the framework of European politics into the First World War of 1914.